Currently, the Islamic State is making significant advances in Iraq and Syria, fighting the Syrian and Iraqi governments, as well as Kurds and numerous Syrian rebel groups, who are in turn also fighting the Syrian government. Additionally, Congress recently approved the President's request to arm Syrian rebels, as well as provide training. At this time, do you support arming Syrian rebels?
Well, first let me start out by saying thank you for putting this together. The last one that we did with the gentleman who will remain unnamed, I was real impressed by the questions, and that's why we're here today. And I want to applaud you for organizing this forum. ISIS is a national security threat. Americans' lives are on the line. And when we look at foreign policy, I believe we should be taking clear criteria that former Defense Secretary Cap Weinberger laid out in the 1980s. He was the Defense Secretary for Ronald Reagan during his presidency. And Cap Weinberger said we should only intervene in foreign issues, foreign conflicts, when two criteria are met. Number one, the issue is a national security threat, and he defined that as the lives of Americans are currently under threat or very soon will be under threat. And number two, we only intervene when we have a plan to win, and that we back up our service members with the resources they need to implement that winning plan. With ISIS, it's clear it's a national security threat, but I have severe reservations about the inadequacy of President Obama's plan. I don't believe it's a plan to win. I don't believe that he's supporting our military with the resources they need to immobilize ISIS and remove them as a threat. Former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, who served under Mr. Obama, has come out to also criticize President Obama's ISIS intervention plan, as well as, get this, former President Jimmy Carter has criticized President Obama. Now, those of you may know, when Jimmy Carter is criticizing your foreign policy, it must be really, really bad. And so I think our member of Congress from San Diego, because we are a military town, many of our residents here in San Diego are the ones that are on the tip of the spear. They're the ones that are going out and they're serving their country. I believe that our member of Congress should be vocal in demanding that we give our service members a solid plan and equip them with the resources to win using that plan. And so I believe that it's inadequate. I think we need to do more. And I think that our military members, when you ask them to put their lives on the line, they should be doing it because they not only have a national security threat to deal with, but we are giving them the tools to succeed. And I think that as a member of Congress, we need our local member of Congress to raise those issues when there's inadequate plans.
Follow-up? So you mentioned Leon Panetta, who in fact supported arming Syrian rebels as early as 2012. And you're saying it's inadequate, so does it mean you do support arming Syrian rebels then?
I think that not only do we need to arm the Syrian rebels, but we need to go beyond airstrikes, and that when the military advisors I have spoken to have said, and in fact in testimony on the Hill, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff basically said that we are likely to have to consider the issue of putting ground troops in. My view is we need to go in with a winning plan, not a political plan. And it sounds like what the president's trying to do is do enough to say that he's doing something, but not do enough to actually eliminate the threat. We need to eliminate the threat of ISIS. It takes bolder action than what the administration has proposed.
All right, asked and answered. Thank you, sir. Next question.
Moving on to another foreign policy affair. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has continued since November of 2013. In May, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. In an email to one of our students, you stated that you disagree with the president's plan of eliminating the possibility of U.S. ground forces because, quote, you should never show your full hand to the enemy. Mr. DeMaio, should we be treating Russia because of its aggression as an enemy country?
I think that Russia, by violating the territorial integrity of its neighbor, has demonstrated that it is not a friendly state. It is not a friendly ally. And we ought to uphold the rule of law. We ought to uphold the sovereignty of nations. This administration has done nothing to stand up to Vladimir Putin's intrusion into the Ukraine. Back in the 1980s, the last time Russia invaded another country, do you all remember when that was? Or which country that was? That was Afghanistan. And in the 1970s, in 1979, what did President Carter do? Well, he said, well, I'll show you. We're not going to go and send our Olympians to the Olympics in Russia. We're going to boycott the Olympics. And what did the Russians say? Well, great, more gold medals for us. We have to do more than simply phone call Vladimir Putin, which is what Mr. Obama did. We need to organize Western European allies, and we need to have an economic boycott of the oil and gas supplies that Russia sells to Europe. I call it the Marshall Plan of 2014, that we need to make sure that we support the Ukraine by imposing strong economic sanctions on Russia. And the only way to really put pressure on Vladimir Putin to respect the territorial integrity of the Ukraine is to hit them in the pocketbook, which is the oil and gas supplies that they ship to Western Europe, by providing an alternative supply through the U.S.
Follow up?
Yes. In response to the economic sanctions already placed on Russia, Russia has placed embargoes on the European Union and created an ally with China through the Russia-China gas deal, which creates more economic opportunities for them. San Diego is, of course, a military city. If the sanctions become ineffective, would you be willing to send troops to defend our allies?
I have confidence that we are going to be able to bring a resolution to this issue if we impose the sanctions that will actually put pressure on Vladimir Putin. Right now, the sanctions that the administration has proposed and promulgated are completely ineffectual. They're not really providing any heat, any pressure on Vladimir Putin. I believe that what we have to do is go after the oil and gas sales. And you mentioned the China deal. That is a long-term deal, by the way. So it's not like they can replace these dollars that they would lose with effective sanctions with our European allies. I'm amazed by the quality of these questions. Are you?
You took the words out of my mouth.
This is impressive, Mark.
This is a civic lesson
This is
right
amazing.
now so far.
Okay, moving on to immigration reform.
They wanted me to just remind us to both to speak directly into the microphone so the folks in the back can hear. We can hear fine up here on stage, but if you folks in the back can't hear, wave or get our attention. We'll take care of that. Thank you.
Okay. As you know, millions of undocumented immigrants are currently residing in the United States. Some members of your party in Congress have argued that they are hurting our economy and that some are bringing dangerous substances into our country. The Obama administration has increased deportation efforts, yet the issue of undocumented immigrants still remains. Mr. DeMaio, you have stated in multiple previous debates that border security should be accomplished before any other aspects of this issue are discussed. But if border security is the sole goal, that still leaves 11 million undocumented immigrants in America who are causing an oversupply of work, driving down wages, and putting American citizens out of work due to underpayment by shady employers. What specifically do you propose we do to handle these immigrants that are still in America?
Great question, and important to San Diego, given that we are a border city, but also given the fact that we've got great diversity in this city. So let me talk about this issue from terms of how I'm challenging my own party. San Diego, I believe, provides the model for how we should talk about immigration. Think about it. When I look around this audience, I see exactly what I am most proud of in San Diego. We are a city of great diversity. We have a third of our population that's Latino, about 15 to 18% that are Asian Pacific Islander descent. We have a thriving African American community from different countries of Africa, each with their own points of view and customs. We have different socioeconomic views. San Diego, however, with all this diversity, we're pretty laid back. We're very respectful. We're very integrated as a city. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of about our city, is that the tone, the tenor by which our communities talk to each other is very respectful. I do not believe the Republican Party has always spoken in a respectful manner about the diverse communities in this country. And I'm challenging the Republican Party to be more respectful in how it talks about these issues in terms of tone and tenor, and also embrace and be more inclusive. Now, on the issue of immigration, I believe we must start by securing the border first. It's not just an immigration issue, it's a national security issue. We just talked about ISIS and the threat that that group may pose to the United States. Border security has to be the foundation for any additional immigration reform. Because if we make immigration process improvements and not secure the border, people can always simply go around that process year after year, and we will still have an immigration challenge. So secure the border has to be a prerequisite. But we also need to adopt reasonable and important reforms in immigration. First, I agree with you. We ought to have sanctions against businesses that take advantage of cheap labor, that go into hiring practices without verifying employment status. And so I support the expansion of E-Verify. I support greater enforcement resources to hold these companies accountable. You know, the Republican Party points out that individuals are breaking the law, but they also don't seem to be focusing on businesses that break the law. Let's enforce the law with all parties. Second, I believe we need to expand some of our visa programs. For example, the H-1B visa program that allows us to bring in high skill sets in this country, engineering, biotechnology skill sets that we need in our economy. We also found out that we have an immigration visa program that's like a lottery system. You win the lottery and you get in. Rather, we should be strategic in looking at various standards for the individuals that we want to invite to be part of the American dream. Finally, we need to make sure that people who do come in here under work visas, that they maintain a job. Basically, a work visa is that you're permitted to be in the United States because you have a job to perform. If you lose that job, I don't believe that you are compliant with your permit. And we should be making sure that full employment is a prerequisite to any sort of visa program in this country.
I'm assuming you want to follow up. Okay.
All right. As you know, there is a bill that was recently passed in the Senate which would increase border security, as well as provide undocumented citizens with a path to citizenship and force employers to verify their employees, among other beneficial changes. In previous debates, you have said that you disagree with this bill because of the special interest influence on it. Now, Mr. DeMaio, you and I both know that when you say special interest, you really just mean stuff that the Democrats added to the bill.
No, actually, why do you think that? Help me understand. What specifically? Because you know my biggest concern about this bill. Let me tell you what my concern about the bill is. First, one of the biggest challenges we have in Washington is they pass these huge bills, thousands of pages long, with a variety of provisions that have no accountability on whether each and every provision is implemented. What I believe is that what we ought to do is take good ideas and run single subject bills. For example, we find in this country Democrats, Republicans, and people in between, independents, they agree that we ought to have a secure border. If you take a look at all the polling in this country, there's great bipartisan agreement of securing the border first. According to a PPIC poll done a month ago, even Latinos see securing the border as a key priority. Well, if the American people agree on an issue like that so widely, why is it that we haven't been able to get that done in Congress? Because you have partisanship, you have political games played in these big bills where both sides try to put poison pills in to embarrass the other side. And both sides are doing it, Democrats and Republicans. What I want to see done is break up those mega bills into specific single subject reforms, thoughtful reforms that we can then hold the administration accountable for implementing. This is an administration that has taken those big bills and they've read the bills as part of a compromise. They've read the bills and said, all right, now that the bill passed, the things that we don't like, we're not going to implement. The things that we held out for and got a concession on, those are the things we're going to implement. I think the American people need to know that when we pass a bill, that the bill is fully implemented first and that we hold the administration accountable. That's why I want to see a series of single subject bills on immigration. I think it would be a far better approach to solving this issue.
Might I, on behalf of the original question, which if I heard it correctly was, what would you do with the 11 million illegal immigrants that are already in the country? Can I just get some clarification on that?
I think part of it is making sure that the individuals that do have jobs and are paying into the system, if they meet the criteria of the revised visa programs, then I would see us having a process whereby they could continue to be here and update their visa status. But for individuals, for example, of the 11 million, some estimates say that about 300 to 500,000 of them have criminal backgrounds. I talk to Latinos and they tell me do something about this. If they have a criminal background, they should not be in this country. And so I think that you can't broadly deal with the 11 million, that what we have to deal with are specific categories and bring them into compliance with our nation's immigration laws. For folks that have criminal backgrounds, I think the answer is clear, that they should not be allowed to stay with criminal backgrounds.
All right, very good. Next question.
All right, so you mentioned securing the border. What specific changes would you propose be implemented?
A great question. My opponent had an opportunity to vote on a very narrow bill to provide funding and to give our border agents the tools they need to secure the border. This bill was brought up in July. You want to talk about partisanship? My opponent voted against this modest compromise bill because the Democrat leader, Nancy Pelosi, said we do not want any Democrat votes for this bill. She twisted his arm, and as a result, he voted against it. Now, this bill would provide the following things that are absolutely necessary. Number one, a legal protocol by which refugees can be expedited and returned to their country if they don't meet the eligibility for entry into the United States. Number two, it would provide financial resources for additional equipment and personnel to patrol the border. And number three, it corrects a very misguided decision by the Obama administration. The Obama administration declared a large swath of our border to be national park space. Now, how many of you have been to a national park growing up? They're great places to go for recreation. But this is not your typical national park. The administration declared a very narrow corridor along the border a national park, not because it really is parkland, but because they wanted to make sure that the Border Patrol could not use vehicles to patrol the border. Because of that designation, they can only use horses. How can you patrol the border if you're not given the tools like vehicles to go and patrol that stretch of the border? And so this bill would have corrected that. It would have said that the Border Patrol can use trucks and vehicles. I want to go one further. How many of you know about the drones? The General Atomics company here in San Diego that creates these unmanned aerial vehicles, the drone vehicles. People say, well, how can we watch every stretch, every inch of the border? Technology. Technology can help us secure the border and then can channel resources to individuals that are crossing illegally. I believe that we have, in this country, we are such a great country, I do not subscribe to the notion that this country can't secure the border. I believe we can do anything that this country puts its mind to, and the reforms in this basic border bill that I just referenced are, I think, just the beginning steps of accomplishing the secure border that all Americans want to see.
Follow? All right, thank you. Let me remind everybody that you do have these note cards, and in about 5 minutes, we're going to quickly pick those up. Anybody that has any questions that you'd like to have asked from the podium, we'll try to do that for you in the 10 minutes we've allotted at the end of Mr. DeMaio's time. So just kind of keep that in mind. Within the next 5 minutes or so, we'll pass those to the sides here and we'll pick those up, all right? Next question.
Mr. DeMaio, there have been serious allegations of sexual harassment brought against you. You personally invited CNN to your campaign headquarters to see documents you said would prove the allegations false. However, according to CNN, the documents they received from your campaign were not conclusive. Your campaign did not authorize the documents for release to the public, leaving the public unable to form their own opinions. CNN reports that when they tried to send follow-up questions, they were first directed to your campaign manager, then Ben Ginsberg, a high-profile lawyer notable for working on Bush and Romney presidential campaigns, and then back again to your campaign manager without receiving answers to their questions. A representative from your campaign then accused CNN of conducting, quote, a partisan witch hunt. Mr. DeMaio, do you believe CNN is carrying out a partisan witch hunt against you?
I believe the CNN story got it completely wrong, and they were given an opportunity to see a mountain of evidence that would have eliminated any credibility for the accuser. Those of you here know that your teachers tell you that you're not allowed to copy other people's work. It's called plagiarism. This individual in May plagiarized a report from the National Journal. He was held accountable for his plagiarism, and he was fired. 2 weeks later, our campaign office was broken into. Every computer was smashed, every single phone cord was cut. $7,000 in damage. Only one thing was stolen from the campaign: our campaign strategy book, which includes all of our polling, all of our plans for television buys. It includes our direct mail, designs on our direct mail pieces, all of our message points, all of our schedules. That book was then given by someone to my opponent, Scott Peters, in early June. He took possession of stolen information. When this individual was contacted by the police department, only then did he make up this lie. I can't control a lie being told about me by someone who's under a criminal investigation. What I can do is tell you it's an outrageous lie. It has no place in San Diego politics. Instead of us talking about how we can get people back to work in this country, instead of us talking about how we deal with K through 12 education and improving our schools, or making sure that our veterans have benefits, in the last 20 days of this campaign, my opponent is now using this smear in both paid and unpaid campaign advertising to drag this campaign into the mud. It's false, it's disgusting, and it has no place in San Diego politics.
So was that a yes, you do believe CNN has been unfairly targeting you?
I think that CNN got the story wrong, and I think that the evidence, as it comes out, will absolutely validate that.
Was there a reason why your campaign shifted from being open, as you initially were, to being very unwilling to discuss the details of the situation?
We've been very open. I mean, this question has come up multiple times. I can't be more emphatic. We've provided a variety of information, including the fact that my campaign manager took a lie detector test administered by the San Diego Police Department on these allegations and passed. I don't know what else I can say, but frankly, if we are at a point in our political system where someone can make an unsubstantiated allegation without a shred of evidence to support it, and that becomes the focus of a campaign for weeks, then our political system has really, really sunk to a new low. I think San Diegans deserve better than that. San Diegans deserve to know where we stand on the issues, and not this sort of mudslinging that my opponent, Scott Peters, seems to be promoting.
Asked and answered?
So the reason you have not been as transparent in terms of releasing documents to the public is because you believe that this is unnecessary, or you're unwilling to do so?
I think what's important is that this is still a criminal investigation into the break-in in my office, and I want to make sure that this person is held accountable for the damage they did to our campaign. I think the most important question that could be asked of Mr. Peters is why, when you got the stolen campaign briefing book, when you got stolen material given to you by an individual, why did you not tell your opponent that their entire playbook, it's like playing football, your entire set of moves was given to the other team? Integrity would demand that you would let that team know. Mr. Peters is a lawyer, and in law, if any of you want to go to law school, you'll learn this. When a lawyer receives evidence in a case, they have a legal obligation to tell opposing counsel that they have come across evidence. In this case, Mr. Peters received our campaign strategy book. He did not have the character to call me and say, "Carl, I've received your entire campaign strategy, and it's early June. I believe this was stolen from your office. And Carl, I want to give this back to you." No. He sat silently for months. And the other question, besides why did you keep this a secret, Mr. Peters, the other question to ask him is, you know who gave you this book. Can you name that person?
So the reason that your campaign called it a partisan witch hunt is because it was confidential information?
I think that it's pretty clear that in the remaining days of a campaign, an unsubstantiated smear being brought up with no evidence and no substantiation It clearly is dirty politics, and it's unfortunate that the Peters camp has been promoting this.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a brief question, and I'll ask this on behalf of Coach Hutzler. My son played football here. Who in your campaign left your entire playbook and strategy out where a common criminal could break in and steal your entire playbook? Any one of the football players that play here at Country Day would face severe punishment for such behavior. And why would a playbook be left someplace not under lock and key?
It was under lock and key. It was at our campaign office under lock and key. You don't expect someone to break into your office, just like you don't expect someone to break into your
Watergate.
Well,
people do break into offices. We all know that.
But you know what? It has no place. It should be absolutely. The fact that our campaign playbook was confirmed on Friday to have found its way into Mr. Peters' hands in June, and he said nothing for months on this. That is very troubling. And so, look, we lock up our office every night. Our office was broken into, and that was verified by the police. And so what else can we do besides lock our office every night? People can break into our computer system, I guess. It's called hacking. But it doesn't make it right. And certainly I wouldn't blame a victim of a robbery for the fact that someone decided to break into their home and take their money or take their possessions.
Just the cop and me asking an investigative question.
Exactly.
Good. Thanks for the indulgence.
Absolutely.
All right, anybody else?
This regards privacy concerns. Under both Democratic and Republican administrations, the NSA has spied on foreign leaders like the presidents of Brazil and Mexico and the Chancellor of Germany. Clearly, this hurts U.S. foreign relations. If elected to Congress, would you vote to end these programs and those that apply to American citizens?
Yes, absolutely. I believe that your email, your cell phone, and your text messages are none of the government's business. They ought to remain private. We have in this country the Constitution. The Constitution gives us freedoms. It gives us the expectation and the right of privacy. If government wants to get your records, they should give you the due process of getting a search warrant. There's an amendment to the Defense Reauthorization Bill that allows for common sense reforms to the spying program that you just mentioned. I would have voted for that amendment so that you have freedom, that your messages are private, that we're not spying on foreign leaders. That bill was voted against by my opponent, Scott Peters. I believe privacy and freedom is so important, and I will be a strong defender of both.
And a quick return to the Islamic State. So you said you were willing to consider ground troops in Iraq and Syria. Would you be willing to use ground troops in other countries that include Islamist groups such as Boko Haram in Nigeria or Al-Shabaab in Somalia?
I think right now we have a clear and present danger with ISIS, and our focus ought to remain on that.
Let me just remind everybody of the clock. In 5 minutes, we'll be taking questions from the audience. So we have 5 minutes left with our panel, so I'll let you confer for just a moment and decide how you want to proceed with the remaining time we have. And then I'll ask that those questions be gathered up and brought down to me, and we'll ask some questions from the audience. Go right ahead.
All right, so you've expressed a desire in limiting perks for Congress in your Fix Congress First Act. How do you plan to gain congressional and bipartisan support for this act?
It's a great question. I feel very passionately about the notion that our elected representatives should live under the same laws as the rest of us. No special exemptions. When I was sworn in on the San Diego City Council, my first act in office was I cut my own compensation 22%. Why? Because we were in the middle of a fiscal crisis in 2008. They had cut our libraries 42%. They eliminated after-school programs. They cut park and rec programs. These are things that all of us, I know all of you, feel are very important to your education and your learning. My opponent made all those cuts, put the city on the brink of bankruptcy. And so my view was, starting right on day one, I needed to lead by example. Not because someone asked me to, but because it was the right thing to do. Cutting my own compensation 22%, giving up the politician pension. By doing that, I gave up $500,000 in payments for the rest of my life. It's a lot of money. We cut our office budget by 20% because I figured that if I'm asking city departments to save a little money, I should show that I can do this myself. Leading by example. We need to do the same in Washington. Politicians in Washington should live under the same laws as us. They should be subject to the Freedom of Information Act, which would allow us to get their records, public records. They should be told that if they don't pass a budget on time, they don't get paid. My opponent, his vote allowed members of Congress to get paid even though they shut down the government. I think that's wrong. If you didn't do your job, you wouldn't get paid. You didn't turn in your homework, you wouldn't get the grade. And so we need the same level of accountability in Washington. I'd also eliminate their special subsidies, the free travel that they get from special interest groups, and the lavish congressional pension program that they've given themselves. They need to start living under our laws. If the laws are good enough for us, they should be good enough for members of Congress.
That's a marvelous response. But how do you plan to get bipartisan congressional support for this act?
When I tour the country, when I talk to San Diegans, most importantly, I'm finding that Democrats, excuse me, Democrats, Republicans, and everyone in between, the people love this idea. This doesn't have a party label associated with it. This is like America. We want our elected officials to lead by example and live under the same laws as us. So I think by building public support and creating a groundswell that every single congressional member will start hearing about the Fix Congress First initiative. More importantly, in this campaign in 2014, many Democrats are now running under the reforms that I propose under Fix Congress First. So there's bipartisan support there. And finally,
I always just look at that as my tax dollars at work. So.
let's hear it from services.
All right. Last question, then we'll go to the audience.
But finally, when I was sworn into San Diego City Council, they said, we don't think that you're going to be able to get this pension reform thing done. You're not going to be able to reform some of these things in city government. In my first week, I got the perks stripped of the members of Congress, members of the City Council. They were going to Qualcomm and Petco Park, and they got themselves a luxury box. The members of City Council got free tickets to go into these the sporting events. We were able to strip them of those tickets and give those tickets only to community volunteers. Second, in 2012, under my pension reform initiative, we stripped them of their politician pensions. Now, members of the City Council can only get a simple 401k, the same benefit as the rest of us out there. These are reforms. The auto allowance. This is a big one. My opponent took $69,334 in free taxpayer payments for his car. Drives a BMW. $69,334. How many of you have parents that you guys get paid? They get paid to drive to and from work by their employer. Anyone get that? Why would members of the City Council get that special perk? We were able to eliminate the automatic auto allowance, and now each member of the City Council has to specifically ask for it in order to get it. That was a big reform because it puts each member of the City Council on notice that they're doing something that everyone else has not been doing.
If there's is there a follow-up to that? Otherwise, we're going to conclude with the panel. One last burning question is the one that you cannot resist asking. There is. Go ahead. I see it in your eyes. Go ahead.
Mr. DeMaio, during the September 23rd debate on NBC7, you stated in terms of social issues, you do not believe government and Congress is the place for politicians to, quote, impose their moral views on the rest of us. You also stated that you're willing to stand up to members of your own party. How do you plan on convincing other Republicans to stop addressing these divisive social issues, some which many feel very strongly about?
I feel very strongly about this notion that you ought to be able to make your own decisions on your health care. You ought to be able to love who you want to love. You ought to be able to be who you want to be. We shouldn't be spying on your cell phone records. We ought to respect your personal freedom. And guess what? There's some in this country that don't agree with that. They want to tell you how to live your life. They don't want some people to marry. I think that's wrong. And I think that those divisive issues that we ought to be focusing on, things that we absolutely need to take action on, which is fixing the economy, fixing the financial crisis, making sure that you have access to college loans and student aid. Those are issues that people really do want to see their elected representatives talk about and solve. So my hope is that we can settle these issues in favor of letting individuals have the right personal freedom to make decisions in the context of their own family, faith, and personal beliefs. These politicians can't balance a checkbook. Why are they telling us how to live our lives? This is a long overdue change. And I think you, the next generation, people who are 15, 16, all the way up to 35 years old, the next generation agrees with me that we ought to respect personal freedoms in this country. I think it's going to happen.
All right, can I get a nice round of applause for the panel? Amazingly well thought out questions, great follow-up questions, and you don't get any tougher questions from
No, this is
the journalist.
amazing.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well,
really good.
it doesn't get any easier, because here's some of the questions from the audience.
All right.
And I have no idea, they're in no particular order, but this one was sitting on top and it pertains to the last question. To those LGBT community members that boo you at events, what do you think they misunderstand about your platform?
I think, a lot of folks in the LGBT community are curious, how could you be a member of the Republican Party? And you know what my response to that is? How else are we going to change? If you don't show up to communities that may not agree with you, how can you start touching hearts so you can change minds? So my partner and I freely go to communities that may not respect our relationship. What I find, though, is that by interacting, these individuals start realizing that we're no different than they are. We have the same challenges, the same relationship hurdles as any other relationship out there. I believe that the work for full equality in this country, which has been done in so many other communities, that the Democrat Party has recognized that we should have full equality, that the remaining work has to be done in those Republican circles. I'm willing to carry the water by being present and challenging the party to change on those issues. It's necessary, and I believe that most people, the vast majority of people in the LGBT community understand that. There are some partisan Democrat members of that community that won't support me no matter what, because they disagree with me on other issues, and that's okay.
All right, what's your opinion regarding undocumented students residing in San Diego? Should they be allowed to receive aid in order to pay for college?
You know, there's a bill that Congressman Jeff Denham is supporting that relates to ROTC and military service. I think that that's a thoughtful bill. I would support that. And I'm looking at, again, ways that we can start creating compliance programs to bring people into full compliance with our immigration laws.
All right, well, this is interesting. It's a two-parter, but basically it's one question. Would you work on making marijuana a Class 2 drug instead of keeping it a Class 1, but really more to the point, also would you work on legalizing marijuana federally?
I believe that California voters in the 1990s got it right, that in this state they want to have medical marijuana. We haven't implemented that law yet. It's been almost 15 years and we still haven't implemented that law. Why? Because the federal government classifies marijuana as an illegal substance and tells states that you don't have the right to regulate this and that we're going to go and enforce. I would support legislation at the federal level to get the federal government out of enforcement on marijuana and let the states decide. In Colorado, their voters went a step further than we did in California. They allow for medical marijuana and recreational use as well. What I want to do is make sure that the voters' decision in California is implemented without any sort of federal impediment or challenge.
Let me just follow up by asking you, and this is based on my experience as a police officer and my experience as a journalist. Is the medical marijuana part of this argument just a smokescreen, quite literally, in order to legalize the recreational use of marijuana? Because we have doctor after doctor come on our show on San Diego 6 that says it's not a medicine. We don't want to keep it out of the hands of people that find some relief from it. That's not our intent, but smoking something is not a good delivery system for any medicine, and we don't find THC to be especially viable as a medicine. So, I mean, is it medicinal, or should we just be honest like Colorado and say, hey, we're going to legalize recreational use of pot?
You know, I'm not a doctor, but I do talk to patients, and they swear by it. And so voters in California decided that they want to provide for medical marijuana for people who have ailments that could be aided by this treatment. And again, I want to see the voter intent implemented.
So you're in favor of medical marijuana but not recreational marijuana?
That's the state law right now. Let's get that one right, and then let's look at additional changes that might need to be made down the line.
Okay. This one says, I've seen a lot of negative campaigning of each candidate on TV. Whew. How do you think this helps your campaign? And this is a question, of course, for both candidates who will be asked of Mr. Peters as well.
I'm proud of the fact that I ran positive ads talking about my work in City Hall and saving the city from bankruptcy, reforming the city, and putting money back into our community service programs like after-school programs and libraries. We made government work in San Diego, and isn't that what it's all about? So my ads have been focusing on my record as a reformer. In my latest ad, I talk about being an independent mind, willing to take on either party to make government work for all. That's been my record in San Diego. It'll be my record in Washington. The big issue I think that we need to address to stop some of these nasty attack ads is we need to get campaign finance reform in this country. We need to get big money from both labor unions as well as big businesses out of politics. They form these things called super PACs. They come in with millions of dollars and they run ads trashing the other side. Both sides do it. It's a bipartisan game that they've been playing. My hope is that we can enact the campaign finance reform proposals that I've laid out so that people are giving money to the candidates and that the candidate has to take accountability for the ads being run. I've had people come up to me and say, hey, I saw your ad. You know, Scott Peters in the car, or Scott Peters. I said, you know what? That's not my ad. And under the law, I can't even talk to them about that.
Now, that's a point of clarification. If you actually do not appreciate some of those ads being run on your behalf, are you not free to go to that group and say, please, that's not who I am, I don't like that ad, please pull that?
No, in fact,
I don't like that.
In fact, and again, looking at the law, I'm like, well, why can't we do this? The law says you cannot communicate with those groups. Plain and simple.
Would
and that's why we need to change the law.
Pull that particular ad?
That's why we need to change the law.
Would you elect to pull that particular ad, the one of Mr. Peters in the car? Would you elect personally, if it was up to you, to pull that ad?
I'm not going to violate the law by saying one way or another what these outside groups should be doing.
You're talking to me. You're not talking to
I
anybody
want
from the
these
campaign.
outside groups to be out of politics by getting full campaign finance reform enacted during my term in Congress.
So you can't tell me whether or not you would pull that ad?
I don't want to have someone come and say that Carl DeMaio was communicating at a public forum against an independent expenditure. I don't want to say that.
And I will grant you that, as that could be interpreted as communicating through me back to that group. That's a fair answer. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give Mr. DeMaio about 30 seconds, and we are right on time. We will take only a 5-minute break, so please don't go anywhere. Just stand up, stretch when Mr. DeMaio is finished, and then we'll bring Mr. Peters out, and we'll have the second half of our program. But Carl, thank you again very, very much. 30 seconds to just
30 seconds. Let me just say, I am so appreciative and impressed that you guys have done this forum. I was impressed 2 years ago when you held a similar forum. And, you know, this is your country. This is your future. And so my hope is that we'll demand action by both parties to make sure your future is as bright as ours was. Thank you very much.